Well, speaking about impact and technology, Arun, I think everyone believes, and we heard that from Ambassador Sandhu yesterday as well, he believes that technology could be the master key that unlocks the true potential of this relationship. But, in areas like critical technology, emerging technology, and the hope and expectation is that we'll see forward movement at the end of this visit. What do you believe we're likely to see unfold?
So I think technology definitely has the potential to be the master key, as the ambassador said. Closer collaboration between the two countries, companies working in the two countries, can definitely take up the relationship to a different level. And the reason is that India has a large talent pool. Every large US company has a very big team of people in India. Sometimes those teams are larger than their teams here. Many of them do design work and very complex technology. So I think that's just going to lift the relationship. Now, some of those folks will go out and start their own companies to serve global markets. So I think we'll see chip designers getting out and starting chip companies to serve global markets. By the way, that's a business we're in. I see that firsthand. I think all of that is going to really result.
On the chip side, because this is one of the big opportunity areas. We've had India and the US sign an MOU in that space. We're, of course, still waiting to see how this operationalizes. But what do you expect? Because, the US is also rolling out a significant package here to get people to manufacture chips here under the CHIPS Act. India, has put a fairly large package in place to get people to manufacture semiconductors in India. How do you see this partnership developing?
So I think the immediate big play is going to be in chip design. In designing chips that will be used by millions, if not billions of people in a number of different areas. There are new emerging areas like electric vehicles, there's new communication standards. All of these will need new chips, and there is no reason why many of those can't be designed and sourced out of India.
So the manufacturing story, you believe that is unlikely to unfold anytime soon in India on the chip side, but the design side will accelerate.
The design side will and should, absolutely. On the manufacturing side, a number of things have to come together, and with the right level of investments and that coming together, in the long run, it will be strategically important for India to have the manufacturing facilities. It also is a question of global redundancies. Today, the whole world is dependent on Taiwan, for example, overly dependent on Taiwan. How do countries want to diversify and have sources in more trusted locations or less risky locations? I think India will have a role to play. Exactly when that's going to happen, I don't know. But it will take a little bit of time, because these technologies can't be switched on overnight. You've got to create the talent pool, you've got to find the critical mineral resources, you've got to have the power, which is an area where India's made a lot of progress in, and so forth. But I think it will happen.
And on the defense side, because again, that's an area of opportunity, and it seems like some of the legacy issues, some of the legacy challenges that constrain this relationship, perhaps we're moving past them or starting to move past them.
I do think we're beginning to move past some of those
issues. And the geopolitics helps.
Absolutely. That's the tailwind that India has. And only makes sense, because you've got the expertise, the technology, and companies in the US would want to diversify their source of supply. So I would expect to see a lot of progress in that space. I also think there will be stronger indigenous defense industry coming up. I know a company in the drone business that's going public soon that's focused on strategic needs. So what's going to happen is India will find its own defense companies being developed.
Absolutely, and we've seen that move towards indigenization, and there's been several measures that the government has taken to encourage domestic manufacturing and, of course, local sourcing as well, and that's playing out.
And I would say going beyond indigenization, some of those companies should supply to the US as well. Sure. That's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, and that should be the aspiration. But Seema, talking about trust, talking about resilience and growth, which is really the underlying theme here as far as this partnership is concerned. Outside of course, specifically, nurturing women entrepreneurs, etc., where do you believe more work needs to be done?
Well, before I answer that, I want to double-click on a message that Arun's conveying here, and we're seeing that a lot on the grassroots ground level, is innovation. And what we're seeing is, the demographic dividend that's been talked about forever is now bearing fruit, in that we're seeing companies that are pitching to us are now innovating not just for the Indian markets but for global markets, and specifically US. And the ambitions are very robust in terms of wanting to be, and that's where a fund like ours serves them very well, because we do straddle India and US in a manner that we can help them, and we hopefully are smart capital. In terms of, to answer your question specifically about what could be areas where we could spend a little more time, is, and especially as relates to the partnership, is really taking some of the best practices and governance that US has matured into, that India could rise to adopt some of those corporate governance measures, especially at an earlier life cycle of a company's growth. And we're seeing that is an area, especially at the grassroots level, where we are rolling our sleeves and working with companies in a manner that they could do much better as they have global aspirations to rise to the level where they're taken more seriously. And I've actually done a fair bit of work in defense, in manufacturing in my prior life. And I've noticed even with some of the middle market companies that are far beyond the startup phase and early growth phase, some of those practices were a little wanting. And so to be able to encourage a partnership between US and India in a manner that we get more directed help in bringing them up on a corporate governance level would be a game changer. And the sensitizing of these companies to saying, if you want to be a player at a global level, you need to step up your actions. I think that'll be a very significant area which will further not just a collaboration but also make relevant Indian companies that are homegrown India-based companies.
Absolutely. Sanjeev, you talked about the impact that the Indian diaspora is making here in the US, but let's talk about the impact the diaspora can have back home in India, and where do you believe the focus now needs to be?
I think India's G20 presidency is a fantastic opportunity for the diaspora to re-up their engagement in India and with India. And it's a two-way street now. There was a time decades ago when it was more about how diaspora can assist India, and that still remains true. But it's also now about what India can bring to the world. So it goes both ways. And Indiaspora, as a matter of fact, is having our G20 conference in August in Delhi. And the focal points are going to be very diverse. It's myriad, like all facets of the relationship exemplify even today. We're going to be talking about the geopolitics, the trade, all of that. But there's also areas in healthcare, education. There was a skilling group that was launched by the two governments on joint skilling activities just a few days ago. I think that is a crucial area. Then with the new education policy in India and the influx of US universities into India, that is another crucial area where I think the diaspora, I know for a fact, is paying very close attention to. Also, bi-directional movement of students. It's very low on the side of US to India. That needs to increase, and I know that there are efforts being made on that. India to US remains strong as ever and is getting stronger. So I think I'd say education, skilling, if I could go back just for a second to the ISET and the manufacturing and the trade part, Seema was talking about governance. She was talking about corporate governance. I'll just sort of change the lens a little bit to governmental governance. One thing that I liked about ISET was that the national security advisors in both countries were signatories to ISET. And the reason I say that, as opposed to any individual cabinet department or agency, is because it brings an all-of-government approach. Because national security advisors on both sides are meant to be the nerve centers, the coordinating nerve centers. So it cuts across agencies, right? So that is one good thing that they did with ISET. On manufacturing and trade, the aircraft engine deal that GE is poised to manufacture in India, I think is a huge thing. It's going to be used in Indian Tejas airplanes. And I think that's a big boost for manufacturing in India with sensitive critical high-end technology. On trade, the order that has been placed with Boeing is also a historic deal. So I think in all facets, whether you're looking at trade, commercial, macroeconomic, or you're looking at diaspora engagement sectorally, I think there's just a lot to look forward to across various sectors.
You know, speaking of looking forward to, in terms of foreign direct investment, Arun, and, you know, I wanted to bring up that point about education as well, because we've heard, in fact, from both sides, and the ambassadors were speaking about this in the morning, that the hope or the expectation is to now start to see US universities setting up base in India once the regulatory framework has now been essentially cleared finally by the government. Where do you believe we are likely to see more FDI coming in? Of course, incremental FDI into sectors where we're already seeing money, but in new sectors, which do you foresee money coming into?
Well, if you're talking about education, we have examples of US companies, US universities going to places like Abu Dhabi and China. So I don't see why we won't see a similar move towards India. But in terms of sectoral investments, I think it's going to be pretty much across the board. I think the reason is that the Indian market is growing substantially. Incomes are going up, and almost every sector sees that there's opportunity there. So it'd be difficult to pick a particular sector because a lot of there are a number of sectors that will see investment.
And given the macroeconomic headwinds, especially here in the US, interest rates and so on and so forth, do you foresee that at least for the next year or so, things are going to be slower on that front?
Here or there?
Here, inbound into India.
Well, obviously the situation here will have an effect on companies globally, whether they draw in or whether they take the long view. There are some areas, though, where there's going to be an imperative to try to bring in India into the picture, and this relates to supply chains. I don't think companies can wait too long to de-risk their supply chains. The memories of what we saw in 2020 are still very, very vivid, and we are therefore seeing more and more companies looking at de-risking their supply chains. From the Indian point of view, policymakers' point of view, whatever can be done to make it easy to integrate into global supply chains will help both FDI into India and exports from India.
Absolutely. Seema, you know, the one thing that you're most excited about and the one thing that you believe is the big risk as far as not just the partnership, but, you know, the India story at this point in time?
I really think there's a massive potential for collaboration and really bringing both what I always call collaborating on the three big sectors, climate, health, agri, but do it in a manner that you're engaging more women.
More women, absolutely. Full you know, support to you on that front. I do hope that we start to see that happen in a much bigger way. Sanjeev, you know, the number one hope as well as what you believe we need to be mindful of on both sides?
I think the diaspora is very excited about India at 100. We are at India at 75, and what the diaspora can do with India to take it towards 100 is an area of tremendous opportunity and growth. I know that this conversation, Shereen, is about US-India, but I think that's true globally. Whether you look at diaspora in England, Australia, Canada, UAE, Singapore, wherever it might be, I think the diaspora is well poised to work with an emerging India as India takes its place among world powers. So that is an area of tremendous excitement. Also, the maturity of the relationship. I think some of the disagreements on substantive issues that India and the United States have today, if these had occurred 10 years ago, then I think the positive movement on other front would not have been possible. But it is happening today. And that is indicative of the fact that friends among each other can disagree on certain issues but move forward on others. So that gives me tremendous hope in the confidence in the stability of the relationship. In terms of risks, I don't know if I want to term them as risks, but challenges. I think the proof of the pudding is always in the eating. And the execution of what a lot of these sort of memoranda and letters of intent and all of that, how it plays out in terms of execution on the ground in various sectors, is something that we need to keep a close eye on. I'm not Pollyannish to think that just because agreements are signed that in every sector there's going to be a boom, but I think there will be in some sectors, and some sectors will need a little more work, a little more push over time.
Well, that's a wrap on this edition of the Global Dialogue. From all of us here on the team, thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned. The news continues on CNBC-TV18.